My name is Mark Chandler, M-A-R-K-C-H-A-N-D-L-E-R. I'm a field operations engineer for the Federal Highway Administration in Madison, Wisconsin. I actually had a couple of reasons. One was my lifelong learning philosophy that I have been able to follow, and getting an undergraduate degree followed by a master's, and then later in life to pursue a PhD. And the specific program interested me because I was having trouble getting permission from my management to take time off to actually pursue a PhD. As I was looking for another activity related to my professional development, and so in my agency that I work for, the Federal Highway Administration, I could conceivably utilize a PhD to my advantage in promotion opportunities that could come along. And then if I did decide to leave the federal agency, because I'm getting close enough to retirement, that's a consideration. I was looking at actually another career as an academic instructor and academician in a university. My research was based upon identifying quality indicators for a PhD consortium, like the consortium that I actually graduated from. And it caught my attention because of one of my instructors in the program, Dr. John Sin, who became my program of study chair and then my dissertation chair, and he had an interest like this. And so I was aware of Dr. Sin's interest, and I've also had an interest myself in the statistical techniques that I would use for this type of analysis. Dr. Sin turned out to be that person who I'd had classes from and met at professional societies, so I had an acquaintance with him. And so when he agreed to become my dissertation chair, it was more a function of finding a topic that he was interested in, that I was interested in, and that would lend itself to a dissertation type of research. And we did find such a topic, and it took a couple of years to get through the dissertation research and then write the dissertation and get it processed. I think the program has a couple of interesting features to it, that if you are drawn to get an advanced degree like this and you do find the PhD program, it will make you a much more rigorous researcher. And in my previous jobs and still in future jobs with even this agency, I could wind up going back into research as opposed to being a civil engineer. And the PhD program would definitely provide the skills and the toolbox and the credentials for doing very sophisticated research. And in the Federal Highway Administration, they do have a research organization that I could apply for a position with that if I wanted to move to Washington, D.C. and become a career researcher with the Federal Highway Administration. Another thing is that if you are someone who is interested in lifelong learning, it does give you that long-term perspective to pursue lifelong learning. I took about the maximum length of time to get my PhD because I really wasn't on a fast track in an academic institution. I'm already a significantly qualified and employed civil engineer, so I essentially took the minimum number of classes just to get through the program, and I completed it in the maximum amount of time, about 8 years. In the future, if I were to study this more, there's a couple of options that occur when you do get a PhD. It's considered a terminal degree, and so you conceivably have the toolbox necessary to study anything you really want or that you're interested in. And so as you write your dissertation and gather your research, and across the couple of years, you tend to focus on different topics that you might have an interest with and identify other people that you might write with or co-author with. So the concept is to unbundle your dissertation. So that will be one of the things that in the next year or two I will be doing, probably co-authoring with my dissertation chair, Dr. John Sin, to unbundle the dissertation, because there are modules to it, essentially, somewhat based on chapters, but also the things that you find in the chapters. The results have some components that could be broken out as individual topics. The methodology section, there are some things that looked like potential topics for presenting papers and presenting presentations for various conferences and publications. If you have the qualifications to get into this PhD program, and that's not a trivial thing, when I got into it, I was quite pleased that I actually was considered as a viable candidate, because the credentials to get into the PhD are themselves substantial credentials. And so they are already at the point of getting into the PhD, you're a well-qualified researcher or you're, for example, a manager in an academic institution, or doing something else that has you as a very functional graduate of a master's program. One of the aspects of the PhD degree has been a substantial increase in my credibility. And in the Federal Highway Administration, we're actually essentially a non-academic institution, but there is another credential called the Professional Engineering License that is very fundamental to conducting a lot of civil engineering activities, especially federal highway and the State Department of Transportation activities. So I came into the PhD program with a PE, and now that I have the PhD, I've noticed that there has been kind of I'm treated differently because the PE is the norm in my environment, and it is extremely difficult to get, and it's very difficult to get a PhD professionally because you spend so much time committing to the PE that once you get the PE, there is really no driver to get you to get a PhD. So being one of the few people that has other interests, the PhD has given me increased credibility and stature, which is to some extent quite important, and it could be conceivably important enough to consider for some positions in the federal government. The impact that the PhD's had on me in some ways has been quite long term. I have become much more rigorous, and we've talked about this aspect of rigor in our professional lives and call it that you've turned over to the dark side in our PhD program because you demand so much more in terms of justifications and logic and research and data that it can make it more difficult in some regards when you have what are apparently trivial problems come to you, but there is no logic, there is no data, there is no methodology behind it. And it does lend itself to making you perhaps perform at a more rational and logical manner, and your writing skills are certainly incredibly enhanced compared to what typically people find. The program is extremely rigorous. Any class you could literally fail. So you probably will wind up taking 18 classes or more across your program. Any one of the classes could be a stumbling block that could get you washed out of the program. The classes are a big function of the program, but then once you get through that, you've got to continue with developing your dissertation research and moving through the policies and procedures necessary to get into your dissertation, gather your research, review your research and resolve it, and then complete your PhD. So the most defining characteristic probably in the program is perseverance, because you've already got to be fairly intelligent, fairly motivated, and have the extra capabilities that would be necessary to get through a 3 to 5 to an 8 year program like this. But you have to persevere. You've got to be able to do it day in and